Andrew Herenstein is a giant in the investment field. But what most people don't know is that a big part of his success was when he borrowed someone's phone on a plane. And well, the rest is history. Find out more this week on Jewish Grit. Andrew, welcome to Jewish Grit.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Thanks for making the difficult commute from Midtown to downtown. So Andrew, thank God Hashem has blessed you with success, I hope personal and professional. And you run a fund today, already for a lot of years. Just 30 seconds about that, where you're at.
So in 2002, I co-founded an investment fund called Monarch Alternative Capital. We started with a few $100 million. Today we have $16 billion of assets under management, and the firm is growing and vibrant.
I'm sure it wasn't a bowl of peaches from 2000, when the early 2000s until today, or even in your career. If I push you and ask you to share with me just one moment where you needed Jewish grit to kind of keep pushing through, is there a particular moment that jumps out at you?
Maybe the most difficult point in my career. I went to business school, went to Columbia. I got a job at Bear Stearns. Some people will remember, but most won't. At the end of '87, the stock market crashed, the big crash. And whatever I was doing after Bear Stearns, I had a job at a small boutique called Breen Murray Forster Securities. That job just sort of ended. And I really didn't know what I was going to do, where I was going to go. And it was actually my father I turned to. And, we just got together and spent a couple hours talking. And he just, pushed me through and said, there's always bumps, there's always hills. You just got to push through and you'll figure it out. And I got a job at a small firm called Delaware Bay, which was a startup firm. And I was the first analyst they hired. And they did distressed debt investing. I couldn't even spell distressed debt at the time. I was the first analyst they hired. They trained me. And the rest is sort of history. I worked at Delaware Bay for 5 years. Then I was recruited away in actually a really fascinating story by two different firms. And I ended up going to work at Lazard, and I met my future partners at Lazard. We were there for 10 years, and then the three of us went and founded Monarch in 2002.
So what do you think is that ingredient in the recipe when a first person does find themselves, like a lot of our viewership are people just similar to you, they're starting their career, maybe they thought their job would be a dream come true and it's a nightmare. What do they need to push through?
To some degree, obviously, not everything's in our hands. We say that Hashem at the beginning of the year tells us, lays out what's going to be for us. But there's also belief in yourself, and just making the effort and fighting through and working through. And I just think people have to really have that own self-confidence.
So you and your partners, you open up a shop. What do you personally do?
I have always loved doing the research. I've always loved digging in, asking questions, trying to find answers, trying to find interesting, fascinating investment opportunities.
Do you find that skill helps you when you study Torah?
I would say yes, but probably the opposite too. Studying Torah sort of helps you be a good analyst in the sense that you're constantly asking questions. You're constantly trying to figure out, what's missing here, what doesn't make sense, what is he trying to say, why doesn't he agree? And it's that thought process which is sort of similar to what we do in our business. Our job is to sort of figure out every single aspect of a company. The investments we make are not just, we invest in distressed debt. And distressed debt investing means you have to be an expert in equity and understand the value of company. You have to be an expert in debt because the instrument we're buying is a debt-like instrument. And you have to be an expert in legal processes and processes in general, which means you have to be an expert in psychology because we're getting around in a room with other creditors and other investors, banks, bonds, management, unions, trade claims, shareholders, and we're trying to figure out how do we get from point A to point B? How do we resolve this disagreement, this problem that this company has where it doesn't have enough capital, it has too much debt, it has to reconfigure, it has to restructure, and there's so many moving people, there are so many moving pieces and so many people around the table that it's really really hard psychologically to get to an end place. And it's just a combination of all of those skills that we need to bring to the table to get the job done.
So you have 3 partners, and you guys have been together for, I don't know, almost 30 years.
Yep.
How do a bunch of different people with different skill sets, like you're saying, in different ways, can keep the peace?
Well, the way we did it was we worked on a consensual basis, that whatever we did, whether it was building the firm, starting the firm, making investments, hiring people, starting new businesses, we try to do on a consensual basis. And if the 3 of us didn't have an agreement, we just didn't do it, or we wouldn't do it as aggressively or in size. And the truth is that I'm not sure it's the most brilliant strategy to start a firm where you do everything by consensus. And maybe we were lucky in that the 3 of us found a path. The 3 of us found a way to work together and make these decisions. But I think the evidence would be that most firms end up with some kind of breakup, some kind of divorce, some kind of separation, some kind of fight. And we were lucky in a certain sense that for whatever reason we had a certain chemistry that worked and allowed us to do this together for 30 years.
Can you share with us a little bit about your investing strategy in eternity? Tzedakah, the religious part of your life. I guess we heard a little bit about the professional, but come back to it. But talk to us a little bit about who you are as a Jew.
So I'll talk about 2 things. First, let's talk about learning. For many, many years, and this sort of ended a little sadly for me with the advent of COVID, but probably for 15 to 20 years before COVID, I would go to a shiur every morning.
That's a Torah class, right?
Yes, a Torah class. Every morning in Manhattan that started at 6 o'clock or 10 to 6. And I'm coming from Long Island, so I would leave the house at 5, get to the city at 6, and I went to a shiur by Rabbi Kalatsky.
Sure.
And we would learn from 6 to 7:30. We would do Chumash, we would do Mishnah, we would do Rambam, we would do Hashkafa, and we would do Talmud and Gemara. And we would do that until 7:30, and then then I would daven at 7:30, and then I would go to work. And it was really just a core part of my life. And waking up every morning and sort of doing your learning and engaging in Torah, I found was just an extraordinarily good way to start your day. And it's actually funny because it impacted me in so many ways. I had been recruited at one point by a major firm that was on Wall Street. And it was a really attractive job and a really interesting compensation. But at the end of the day, I didn't want to give up the shiur because the shiur was in Midtown, right next to my office. And staying where I was, in retrospect, turned out to be the best thing that I did. I'll give you another story on that front. When I was at Delaware Bay, this is sort of the job after I had gotten laid off and I couldn't find a job. I took a job at Delaware Bay where they taught me distressed debt. I was there for a couple of years, and my wife's family's from Chicago, and her grandfather was having his 80th birthday party in Chicago on Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night. So the party Shabbos was very late because it was August, it was the middle of the summer. And so my wife had gone early, but I decided I was going to fly on Friday, go to work a little bit, and then fly Friday afternoon. And I get on the plane, and the plane takes off a little bit late, and then we start circling Chicago and circling Chicago and circling Chicago. And at one point, the pilot says, "We've been cleared to land in Chicago, but we don't have enough fuel. So we're going to land in Detroit, we're going to refuel, and we're going to head right back to Chicago." So we land in Detroit, and everything takes time. And by the time we're getting ready to take off, I probably have 2 hours until Shabbos. And it's a very short flight. I have enough time. But as luck would have it, we take off. By the time we take off and by the time we land, I'm literally within my 18 minutes. In other words, Shabbos is starting. I don't have any time. And this was 1988, 1989, so before cell phones for the most part. And I see a guy in the front of the plane after we land with a cell phone that looked like the size of a shoebox, one of those huge cell phones. Sure. And I walked to the front and I said, "Excuse me, but I have to ask a favor. Can I borrow your phone?" And it's not like borrowing a little cell phone. This is like a big deal. I have to make an emergency call. He says, "Sure." So I called my wife and I said, look, I just landed. I'm stuck here. I'm going to find a hotel at the airport and I'll meet you at the party Saturday night after Shabbos. So the guy turns to me and says, you're going to tell me that you're not going to be with your wife and your family because of Shabbos? I said, that's right. I have no choice. He says, come with me. And he brings me to the Hilton and he gets me a first floor suite at the Hilton and kosher food for the entire Shabbos. Turns out he was a personal friend of Conrad Hilton. He was a very big banker. And he set me up for Shabbos. It was the longest Shabbos of my life. Sure. Shabbos didn't end until like 10 o'clock at night. But I had a chumash, and so I just went through chumash the entire, either I was sleeping or I was reading chumash over Shabbos. I made the party Saturday night, and it was great. My wife said, make sure you stay in touch with this guy, thank him. And so his name was Ira Harris, Zichrono Livracha. He passed away a few years ago. And he worked at a firm called Lazard Frere. About 2 years later, I'm getting recruited by headhunters, and there are two firms that want to hire me. One is Lazard, and the other is Lehman Brothers. And I go through the whole process, and I decide I'm going to go work at Lehman. And my wife says, you really should call Ira and just tell him what's going on. So I called him. 10 minutes later, the guy I was interviewing with at Lazard calls me and said, we need to talk to you again. So I go back in, and they lock the door, and they said, Ira said you can't leave until you sign here that you're coming to work at Lazard. I said, I'm not working at Lazard. I already took a job at Lehman. And, he says, here's the phone. You have to call Lehman and tell them that you're not working there. And we had a whole back and forth. I ended up doing that, and I got this job at Lazard, which really was the pivot point of my entire career, because I worked at Lazard for 10 years. I became a partner there. And then the partners that I met at Lazard, the three of us broke off 10 years later and founded Monarch, and the rest is history. Yeah.
So your dedication and commitment to Shabbat ultimately set your career in the right. Yeah. That's fantastic.
It's funny because that's a story. When I hear a story like that, I often roll my eyes. You hear people. But this is a true story, happened to me, and so it's. I take it a little bit more seriously.
I love it. That's such a great story. Talk to us a little bit about giving, because I know that's one of the things that you're an expert at.
I don't know if I'm an expert. In fact, I would say my wife is more of an expert than I am. We do all of our tzedakah, all of our giving together. We discuss we treat them like investments. We discuss every investment. We do research. We want to understand the different charities, different organizations, the people that run them. But it's a little bit less natural to me than it is to Terry, who's my wife. She's always driving to find new organizations to give more. We'll often, when we find an organization that we like and we do diligence and we'll each come up with a separate number as to how much we want to give. And I almost always use her number because she's usually got the right instinct on it. And we spend a lot of time thinking about what's important to us. We give our money to a lot of different organizations, but we spent a lot of time on education. Educating the next generation is just critically important to us, and we've given both significantly to Yeshiva University, we've given to Shalem College, we've given to a number of yeshivot, both in the U.S. and Israel, and I would say it's probably the largest single category of where we've given money.
If you could go back and have a conversation with yourself 25, 30 years ago, and talk to yourself and give yourself a little bit of advice, what would you tell yourself maybe to do or not to do?
I would say a few things. One, I would probably take more risk. I'm by nature not as of the partners. I'm not the most risk. I'm the most risk averse in a certain sense. I would probably take more risks career-wise. I had a chance, for example, to go to London at some point in my career. And looking back, I probably would have done that for a period of time. But from an investing perspective, from a changing jobs perspective, I think when you're young and you can take risks, it makes sense to do it. Later in life, it's harder when you have a family, when you have kids, when you're more settled. Sometimes it can be harder to take risk. The second is not to be ashamed of who you are or embarrassed by who you are as a Jew. I think especially today in society, it's more accepted, it's more open. When I first went to work, I did not wear a kippah every day. And most people, it was hard to find people that really would do it on a regular basis. I actually started, my younger brother started before me. He started, he was a partner at Sanford Bernstein. He was becoming more religious. He started to wear a yarmulke. And then at some point, it's got to be at least 20 years ago, I just decided that I was going to do the same thing, and I started wearing a yarmulke to work, and nobody ever said a thing to me. And what's crazy is I travel all around the world. I travel to Europe, I travel to Asia, and I just always wear my yarmulke, and I've never had an experience where it affected me negatively, and it led to some very interesting conversations and discussions over the years.
Talk to us a little bit about what makes you proud to be a Jew. I'm assuming that you are.
Jewish or proud? There's a lot of things that make me proud. I heard Rabbi Herschel Schachter say something a while ago.
He's the rabbi at Yeshiva University.
Yeshiva University, exactly. That he was a link between the previous generation, his parents and his grandparents, and his kids. And he continued the tradition. He was just one link in that tradition. And I think that's what we all are. We're all a link. We've gone from Sinai 3,500 years ago, I think it was, to today, passing on Jewishness and the Torah from generation to generation, and just being one link in that extremely long chain is something that I'm extraordinarily proud of.
It's amazing. I remember when we learned American history, and I asked this to my teacher in high school, and I'm like, American history is a sneeze in our lineage, in our history. He's like, well, you're going to focus on that sneeze, young man. That's wonderful. Has your definition of success, just in general, evolved? Has it changed from when you were a young person starting your career, when you started your company, until today? I
don't know if it's changed, but success can be defined in a number of different ways, and I'll talk about two. The first is really nothing to do with business. It's building a family and having kids and transmitting values to another generation is something that is, to me, satisfying and a sign of great success. And in fact, I would argue that the same thing is true in business. While it's great that we've created this valuable company and we've raised all this capital and we do this great job for investors, one of the things I'm most proud of at work is the fact that I trained a generation of investors who then trained another generation of investors who trained another generation. And I feel like I have great grandkids in the business, because each time another generation is trained by someone that I trained, who was trained by someone that I trained, etc. It's just immensely satisfying.
It's beautiful. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your brother, who was a partner at Sanford Bernstein? Is he still there?
No. He left Sanford Bernstein 20 years ago, I'm guessing, and he was the head trader at Sanford Bernstein. I always remember, he covered the government of Singapore, was his biggest client. And at some point he decided that he wanted to sit and study Torah. And he and his family made Aliyah. He had 4 girls, and they all did it together.
They moved to Israel.
They all moved to Israel. They moved to Beit Shemesh. And sometimes you hear horror stories or challenges and difficulties when families move, when their kids are older. Not everybody buys in, and there's challenges and such. And they did an extraordinarily good job. They moved to Beit Shemesh. He was very close to Rabbi Weinberg, who you and I talked about earlier, and Rabbi Weinberg was very influential in his life. And he went and sat and went to yeshiva in Beitari Lit, called Birkat Mordechai, which is run by Rabbi Yaakov Friedman, who originally from Denver, an amazing Rebbe, an amazing man. And he just sat and learned for 15 years, day and night. And he studied Torah like it was a job. Like, he would get up early in the morning, he'd have a little bit of lunch, and he would learn until night, and he'd come home and he'd have dinner, and he'd sit down and learn again. In the way when you have a job and you're serious about it and you work hard and you drive yourself, he did the same thing in this new job of his. I used to joke with him that he had a great pension plan in this job.
At least an eternal pension plan.
Exactly. I think he was there for 15 or so years, and then Rabbi Friedman said to him, "It's time for you to leave the yeshiva." And what he meant by that was, it's time for you to give back. You've learned for a long time. You've developed all these skills and all this knowledge, and it's time to give back. And he ended up working as a Rebbe at Or Sameach, where he is today. And he's, I'm told, one of the most popular Rebbeim there. A lot of these kids have very little background. And for them to spend time with someone that's not only extraordinarily knowledgeable in Gemara and Yiddishkeit and Torah, but also knows the secular world and was a trader at Sanford Bernstein and was, extremely successful, is something for them to really look up to and to emulate and learn from. And he's really had amazing success in both of his careers.
This has been beyond fascinating. I feel like we're just starting. I am so grateful for you for giving us the time. So many multifaceted points in the conversation. Wish you loads of success. And I think we got to get you back to do episode 2.
Happy to come back.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Jewish Grit, an Olami Mentorship podcast. At Olami Mentorship, we believe that everyone needs a mentor. What better way is there to tap into your personal and professional potential than with a Jewish mentor at your side? Learn more at olami.org/mentorship. Don't forget to keep listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.